Christian parenting.
This calling is one that a phrase that I like to use over and over again is love fiercely and hold loosely. And that is a real test of the heart and a real growth opportunity in our faith walk with the Lord, to be able to love these children fiercely and hold them loosely, not fully knowing what the ultimate plan and result is going to be. Should you or should you not adopt the foster children in your home? That is the question for many foster parents all across the country, and it is the topic for today's episode here on the Call to Love podcast. Hey, families, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me. As you know, each week we dive into the practical, the clinical, and always most importantly, the biblical aspects of the adoption and foster care callings. Hey, it is May, which means it is Foster Care Awareness Month, and adoption through foster care is a huge part of this ministry out of our homes. And so we're going to talk about that today. This episode has been inspired by one of our amazing listeners who I recently had the pleasure of receiving an email from. Claudia and her family are walking through this very question right now. And I know that if Claudia is walking through it, many of you are as well. Our family was actually in this position about a year ago. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of our story and then just share some insights with you that I have learned by walking in this space. But before we get started, I just want to begin by saying thank you. For those of you who are praying about foster care, for those of you who are taking steps towards foster care, or those who are actively serving in foster care, thank you for this ministry that you are conducting from your home. Your home is a sacred space, and to welcome this ministry, the brokenness that is involved in this ministry into your home is such an incredible thing. And I'm just so grateful for your example and your obedience. Listen, guys, it's challenging. It's beautiful, but it is a challenging calling. And when you set out to foster, you're guarding your heart because it is an impermanent thing by nature. And then when adoption is thrown into the mix, there are a lot of things to wrestle with and to consider. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Let's begin just by the reality of and some statistics around adoption in foster care. So in the last several years, on average, you have about 400,000 children who are coming into care all across the nation. Of those 400,000 kids in foster care, about 100 to 125,000 of those children nationwide become eligible through adoption. This happens because a reunification plan has not been successful, and blood relatives or kinship placements, people who know the children from the community or friendships, are not able to or willing to take the children permanently as well. The next people in line for that are you, the foster parents. And so for those of you who are seasoned, bear with me over the next couple of minutes. I'm going to dive into some of the fundamentals. Maybe for those of you who are just now praying about and exploring the option of foster care, I want to give you some facts around that. And then we're going to dive a little bit into things to prayerfully ponder and consider if adoption through foster care is a question that you are facing. Okay, so with those statistics we just talked about, there are the details of a case plan being worked. So when a child is found to be unsafe in their family of origin, the state comes in and removes them, and they are placed in temporary care, being foster care. Sometimes that looks like a respite home, which means temporary. It could be a weekend, just a couple of nights while they find a longer term placement. But as soon as a child comes into care, a caseworker is assigned, and that job is solely focused on finding a safe caregiver for that child, while also working with the biological family to help them to complete the steps to show the state that they can successfully reunify with their child. So the first thing that they're going to look for is any kind of relative. It might be grandparents, it might be aunts and uncles, it might be cousins, it might be a teacher in their school, it might be a coach, somebody that they know from church. Those are all called kinship placements. And that is somebody who's already kind of in the child's community, in the child's world, that they are able and willing to care for the child. If this is not an option, or sometimes it takes a long time to find those relatives, and so the child is going to be placed into a foster home. Now, for many children, foster placements don't last very long for various reasons. Unfortunately, a yes to foster care doesn't always mean that there's a full understanding of what you're saying yes to. And so when families are introduced to the realities of trauma behavior and welcoming that kind of brokenness into their normal rhythms of life, they're not equipped and able to handle it, or they don't have sound support systems in place to help them to walk through those early and harder days related to the trauma and the needs of the children. And so they do what's called disruption. And this means a child has to leave that home and they go to another one, and so forth and so on. There are children who, in just a few short years' time of their stay in foster care, have upwards of 10, 20 placements, different homes, different families, different dynamics, different people to get to know and to question, can I trust these people and are they just going to get rid of me? Or if the trauma is so severe, they're self protecting and they're saying, I'm going to do everything I can to make these people get rid of me. Number one, because maybe if I do, I can go back to my bio family, which is faulty thinking, but it's the way children survive. Or I don't like the rules. I don't like the structure. I don't like this. I don't like that. So I'm going to do everything I can to disrupt and to get kicked out of this place. And they go from one place to the next. So again, very challenging in our calling. So there's so many dynamics that are thrown into the mix of that because the caseworker is trying to find permanency for this child. One of the things that you may not be prepared for, or maybe were not prepared for as a foster parent, is what we call congruent planning. And this is ideally the caseworker is working with that biological family or the family of origin to work the steps to successfully reunify with their child. In the meantime, they've got to come up with other options just in case. And so sometimes, even early on in your placement, when you've barely had a chance to get to know the child, you might get that question from your caseworker. Hey, if it happens, would you be willing to adopt this child? That puts you, the foster parents, in a really, really difficult position because, especially as believers, we don't want to reject, especially children. And we want to give love freely and we want to offer our homes freely and we want to say yes. We feel guilty when we don't. But there are so many things to consider and can be a really, really difficult place for you to be put in. Sometimes that happens early on, sometimes that happens months into the placement or even last minute. It is very, very common for a reunification plan to be in place and being working towards, and then something happens with the family of origin and it no longer is possible. And so you get a quick 180 from that caseworker saying, okay, we thought we were unifying, but never mind, we need somebody to adopt these kids. Are you willing? It's a lot to consider, but I want to prepare you on the front end, especially our friends who are praying about this calling and considering it. This is something you need to know is a possibility. Now, on the flip side of that, I also want to share that with those statistics and the higher likelihood of adoption through foster care, I'm going to roughly give you a percentage of about 35 to 40% of foster cases end up in adoption. If your goal is adoption, it is important for you to understand the unpredictability and the impermanency of the plan. So, what I mean by that is a caseworker could be telling you from day one, hey, this case is going to adoption. And then you get 6 months down the road and they're like, just kidding. We're going with a relative, we're going back to bio family. And so, this calling is one that a phrase that I like to use over and over again is love fiercely and hold loosely. And that is a real test of the heart and a real growth opportunity in our faith walk with the Lord to be able to love these children fiercely and hold them loosely, not fully knowing what the ultimate plan and result is going to be. So, that being said, we were in a very similar situation about a year ago where we had an opportunity to foster a child and pursue adoption of this child. And on paper, it checked all the boxes. I mean, I'm telling you, it could not have lined up better. It made sense logically. There were so many reasons why we felt like this was a good direction for us to take, both for our family and for this child. And our hearts were invested quickly on both sides. I will never forget standing at a baby shower that I took our adopted daughter to and our, at the time, soon to be foster child. And the child looked at me and whispered in my ear, can I call you mom? And at the time, I was already feeling a pause in my spirit and I wasn't sure. And I was trying to guard my heart, guard her heart. How do you answer a question like that? It was so, so challenging in that moment. So, guys, as the host of this show and someone who's been involved in this world for over a decade, I'm telling you, I didn't know what to say. And there's going to be moments where you're not going to handle it perfectly and you're not going to know what to say. And something like that is going to throw you off terribly. And I'll get back to in just a moment a little bit of the results of where the Lord took us. But I just want to encourage you to give yourself grace as you are wrestling through this question. This doesn't make you a bad Christian. It doesn't make you a bad parent. It doesn't make you a failure in your calling of a foster parent. It is a very natural and necessary part of being a part of this calling to wrestle with these questions because they are going to come. So, when and if you are faced with this question of should you adopt the foster children in your home, here are a few things that I want to encourage you with and to consider prayerfully. First question to consider: are you and your spouse, if you're married, in complete unity and agreement over this decision? Either way, begin to pray together and pray individually for God to align your hearts and bring clarity to this decision. For some families, you're in this and you're like, I've known from day one that this is my child. This is an easy yes. Fantastic. For others, you're like, I'm just not sure. We need to consider all the factors. We need to kind of talk through some of this. That's okay. And for others, you're like, as much as I want to, I simply do not feel like I am this child's forever parent. Hey, friends, that's okay too. Take the time you need until you are in full agreement with your spouse and with the Lord. Do not feel pressured to give a yes or a no. Unity in your marriage, if you are married, is key to be able to live out this calling well, because the enemy is all over this and he wants to get into any kind of crack he can to start to break down and cause division and dissent in your home. So you and your spouse must be unified in your yes, unified in your parenting, and unified in your obedience to the Lord and how you move forward. Number one thing to consider. Number two, the best advice that we received when, Claudia, we were in your shoes, and for any friends who are walking through this right now, if you feel a check in your spirit, pause. Take all the time you need to prayerfully consider, and do not feel pressured to give an answer because of the system's timeline. There's all kinds of pressure coming, and they're going to want this and they're going to want that, because their job is that congruent planning. They're trying to check that box on the paperwork, and I'm not trying to like make the caseworkers sound bad. They're just trying to do their jobs. But as foster parents and as adoptive parents, sometimes we're at the very bottom of the totem pole, if you know what I'm saying. Like, we are servants. We are called to serve in this way, but we are not without a voice, and we are still a part of the consideration as a whole. Does that make sense? So I want to encourage you in that the value of your voice and all of that, the state is not forever affected by the decision. Your family is. Your home life and your future is forever changed by your yes or by your no. So take your time. You are in control of your yes and your no, and I want to give you permission to stand in the authority of that truth. Okay? Hey, families. Marriage is the foundation of our families. When our marriage is strong, our families are strong. When our marriage is struggling, our families struggle too. We all know we should prioritize our marriages. However, in the busyness of life, it is easy to push our marriages to the side and say, we'll just focus on that later. If you're feeling the nudge to invest in your marriage, Christian Parenting's newest digital guide, Marriage Simplified, is the resource for you. Additionally, if you're struggling with difficult conversations that surround divorce, blending families, in-laws, or single parenting, we cover each of those topics head-on as well. Inside this guide, you will find our best and favorite podcasts, videos, and articles on all things marriage. You will also find conversation guides and discussion questions for your spouse and your kids. The best part is, since this guide is digital, you can download it straight to your phone or computer and search through resources whenever you need them. Marriage is far from simple, and no guide can truly simplify it, but we are so glad that you are taking the time to pore over these resources and strengthen the relationship and family that God has blessed you with. You can go to cpgive.org to download your copy for just $5. That's the best of the best resources from top Christian parenting contributors for just $5. Again, you can grab your copy at cpgive.org, and we'll have the link in today's show notes. Number 3, the children who are forever yours in your home are a top consideration. So if you already have other children in your home, whether biological or maybe they've been previously adopted, or maybe even other foster children in your home, they're a different case, a different biological family, not related to the case that you are working, they are still a top consideration because they have been given to you to steward and to consider how they have been and would be affected by a forever yes to a child in your care. Listen, by doing that, it doesn't make you bad, it makes you good parents. You have to consider all of the people and all of the factors involved, and the children in your home are at the top of that list, right underneath your marriage, okay? So don't feel pressured to make a decision based on tugging of your heartstrings. I would encourage you as parents, sit down with your kids individually and have age appropriate conversations about the foster siblings, how they feel about them being in your home, and what their feelings are about a permanent arrangement. Their insight may be the eye-opening moment that you need to determine the yes or the no, to give you that clarity. The Lord uses prayer, he uses his word, and he uses other people to help us to come to determination of what we should say yes or no to. And so your children are a big part of that. So don't be shy about or feel guilty about asking them. It's not a bash session for the kids to just totally trash the situation or you or the siblings in their home or anything like that. It is an honest, heart to heart moment of connection saying, hey, what is your experience? How do you really feel about this? And what do you think if fill in the blank? I would encourage you to do that. Next, number 4, ask yourself, each other, and the Lord, are these children meant to be with us forever or for just a season? Friends, as foster parents, as I said, this is a very unpredictable and very impermanent type of a calling that you are engaging with. And so sometimes your assignment for a specific child is just for a season, and that is okay. You are still a part of their story, even if you're not their forever story. Transitioning kids to their next place of care does not mean you have failed or that you have given up on them. God loves those children more than anyone, more than you or I ever could, and he already knows what their future holds. And so one of the ways to look at it is don't stand in the way of them going to their forever, okay? So sometimes a no is releasing them for their intended permanency. Sometimes a no is a protection for your family of what may or may not be to come based on their trauma, their behaviors. And that's okay to think of it that way. Children in themselves they're not bad, but there are behaviors and certain things that could perpetrate within your home that could be unsafe. And so those are things to consider. And sometimes there are other families who are better equipped to fully devote themselves to those particular needs and behaviors and the recovery of that child that you're not able to do. That doesn't make you a failure. You don't have to be the end all be all solution to these children's problems. Sometimes you're there for a season, and sometimes you're there forever. And that is up to the Lord to guide you in all of that. But I want to give you that perspective. Lastly, where there is peace, the Lord is there. Where there is confusion, fear, or guilt, that's the enemy. Okay, so if God intends for you to be this child or these children's forever family, even if it's hard, there's going to be peace. Okay, if you do not have peace, listen to that. And God has a way of getting our attention when it comes to Him showing that His peace is not in a particular situation. When it is God's will, it does not mean that there's not going to be challenges. There will still be peace and even joy in the midst of that hard. But when he is trying to get our attention and say, this is not my will, I do not give my peace to this situation, we need to listen to that and we need to release any guilt that we have and any lies that we're believing that we failed the children or that we're bad foster parents, bad Christians, all the things. You need to dismiss those lies as from the enemy and know that sometimes a lack of peace and a no is from the Lord for your good and for the good of the children in your care. So let me get back to our story as we're kind of wrapping up today's episode. I agonized over saying yes to this child in our home because, again, on paper, it made so much sense. But there was a check in my spirit and an unrest that I could not explain. So we did a couple of weekends in a row of kind of like a trial placement before we made the permanent move over to our home. And this is very uncharacteristic of me, but both weekends I either could not go to sleep or would wake up from a dead sleep in an unexplained panic, to the point where my husband would have to really work to calm me down. And I couldn't breathe. And I felt just this absolute panic. It was completely out of character for me. And so we sought counsel from one of our trusted pastors and his wife. This pastor has known me since I was in high school. His wife is a mentor of mine, and she also happens to be a mental health professional. And they have an adult adopted child. And so they checked all the boxes in terms of wise counsel that we could seek out. And through that conversation, they encouraged us to pause. Some of the things that I shared with you, that best advice, that came from them. And so we received wise counsel. We prayed, and we came to the hard decision that this child was not meant to be in our home. And I felt like a fraud, friends. I mean, in the midst of creating episodes for you who are listening, I was going through all of this and I felt like an absolute fraud. And the enemy had a heyday with me, telling me what a fraud I was and what a failure I was, and how this was on me and my fault for even suggesting it and being willing, and look what I've done and all that. Listen, the accusations came at rapid fire. But in the midst of all of that, there was peace in the decision. As hard as it was, I knew it was the right thing to do. Just a few months later, I learned some really, really hard things about that child and their case, and some behaviors that had not been disclosed, and some truths about the trauma that had been disclosed later on that would have had a horribly detrimental effect on our daughter. And when I found out that information, the Holy Spirit just nudged me and said, "This is why you didn't have peace. This is why I allowed you to be uncomfortable, because I knew this." And so, in that moment, for our story, this isn't true for everyone, but for our story, he allowed me to see what he was essentially protecting us from. And he knew that the only way that I would listen is to allow me to experience the panic and the discomfort. So, friends, I share that part of our story just to encourage you to listen. You know, our bodies were designed by the Lord intricately and beautifully, and there are ways that stress and unrest affect us physically that we need to pay attention to. And there are certain things, through wise counsel and through devoted time in prayer and in conversation with our closest loved ones, namely our spouse, and then with wise counsel. If you're not feeling, and I want to be careful with that word feeling, because feelings lie. There's some days that are, they're so hard and you feel like you can't go on, but you know you're called, so you keep going. At that moment, we knew we had to let go of that potential. And so these are all things for you to take ownership of, and to prayerfully consider and to ponder. Again, I can't tell you should you or shouldn't you, but these are things, wise counsel that we received, and some examples that I can give you to try to help you better navigate this question if and when it comes up for you, dear friends. So I want to thank you for listening today. And I also, again, I want to thank you, our listeners, who send in your questions, who inspire these episodes to minister to others. Guys, I don't always have all the answers, but I am so grateful to lean into a team of experts through the guests that the Lord sends to the show, and the insights that he's given me, honestly, through doing it wrong so much of the time. But there has been so much that we have learned, and so much that I want to be able to pass on to you. So if you have more questions related to this topic, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address for the show is in the link in the show notes for today. So please don't hesitate to use that and to reach out if you have any follow-up questions, any examples that you might can share, any additional wisdom that you might offer based on an experience that you've had. I would love to get those on the show and share them. And if you would, partner with us, as Called to Love is growing. And I am so honored to, we've hit the top 100 parenting podcast on Apple. That's incredible. That's because of you. So if you will go after our show is over today and hit that follow button so that the episodes continue to pop up, that would be so helpful. If you would even leave a comment to share how this podcast podcast maybe has encouraged you or something that you have learned, or just recommend it. That will help more families like you to be able to discover this podcast and the ministry and community that we've been able to build here through Called to Love. So thank you so much, friends. And I look forward to continuing on for the next 2 weeks with episodes related to our foster care awareness. We've got some great interviews coming up, and I can't wait for you to hear them. Until then, go live out your own call to love, sweet friends. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.